How to keep people from pushing your buttons. To keep people from pushing your buttons, you'll need to work with yourself to identify your insecurities before a pushing incident arrives. When an incident does arise, you should step away and take the opportunity to analyze your thoughts and feelings more thoroughly. Learn from each experience once it ends so that you can guard your buttons even better in the future. Part 1 Before 1. Take responsibility for your reactions. First and foremost, you need to realize that no one else can truly force you to feel one way or another. You are ultimately responsible for your own feelings and responses. You cannot keep people from doing things that could push your buttons, but you can keep your buttons from being pushed. 2. Release the desire to change others. Just as others cannot force you to react the way they want, you cannot force others to act and react the way you want. Give up in the idea of stopping someone from antagonizing you. Identify any desire you have to change someone, make someone wrong so that you can feel right, control someone, or force someone to hear you. Also identify any expectations you have over how things must be between you and other people. These desires can be general tendencies or desires that only apply to specific people. Either way, you need to identify them and stop yourself from clinging to them. 3. Examine your buttons. Think about the last time someone pushed your buttons and set you off. Ask yourself what your sore spots are and think about how to mend them. Try to identify the root cause of your buttons. Ask yourself what insecurity or fear they connect to at your core. If you cannot figure these things out on your own, try talking things over with a counselor or objective friend. 4. Detach from your ego. Remind yourself that the world doesn't revolve around you. You are just as important as anyone else, but ultimately, everyone else has just as much innate right to happiness and an overall sense of well-being as you have. Commit to the idea of having peaceful reactions. Reaffirm this commitment in your mind each day to help it stick. 5. Create boundaries. Think about the people who regularly push your buttons and set up healthy boundaries between you and them. You cannot control how they behave, but you can limit the number of opportunities they have to push your buttons. People who want nothing more than to make you feel bad should be cut out of your life as completely as possible. A loved one who will use your weaknesses against you when it benefits him or her may stay in your life, depending on the circumstances, but you need to have a serious conversation about the problems between you both. If the behavior continues even after you discuss your boundaries, draw your own boundaries by ceasing to communicate anything that could later be used against you. 6. Think in positive terms. Your reactions are determined by your feelings, and your feelings are determined by your thoughts. Get in the habit of regularly viewing things from a positive perspective so that you'll have fewer buttons to press. Thoughts generate emotions. Emotions generate behavioral choices, and each choice you make will have an outcome, whether that outcome is good or bad. If you start the process with negative thoughts, the outcome will probably be negative. On the other hand, positive thoughts are more likely to lead to positive outcomes. For instance, if you have a long-distance friend who never calls or writes to you first, you may view their behavior in a negative light. Maybe that same friend always replies to you quickly and seriously, though. Focus on the seriousness your friend does display instead of the neglect to shift your perspective from negative to positive. 7. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Respect often begets respect. The treatment you give others is the treatment your actions deem to be acceptable. Showing someone respect does not guarantee that he or she will respect you in return, especially if that person has no intention of getting along with you. Respecting your loved ones and treating them fairly will usually encourage them to do likewise, though. Part 2 During 1. Give yourself some breathing room. When someone says or does something that pushes one of your buttons, step away from this situation before you have a chance to react. By giving yourself time to process your feelings, you create a filter between your brain and your mouth. This filter can prevent you from reacting in a manner that will make the situation worse. Let yourself feel whatever you feel during this time. Cry, swear, or shout into a pillow if you need to. Once you've vented your emotions, do something to calm yourself down. Meditate, do deep breathing exercises, or go for a walk. 2. Identify the hurt. There are different types of hurt. Ask yourself what exactly you're feeling and why the situation made you feel the way you do. You'll need to stop blaming the person who antagonized you for this to work. Only by focusing on yourself can you properly address your emotions. Among other possibilities, your hurt may result from feeling misunderstood, lonely, rejected, abandoned, neglected, or insufficient. It can even be a blend of different feelings. 3. Connect the dots. Think about the past and identify other times when you felt this way. Figure out how these separate incidents are all connected. If you did your homework beforehand, you may already have some idea of what your major buttons are. That will usually make it easier to connect this incident to one of your known buttons. If you cannot connect this issue to a known button, however, take the time to figure out which button you missed and what lies at the root of it. 4. Identify irrational feelings and thoughts. Step back and try to look at things from an objective perspective. Ask yourself if any of your current feelings or thought processes are irrational. Challenge these irrational ideas. Ask yourself about the meaning you've assigned to this particular hurt. What does your gut think this incident means? Once you've specifically identified the perceived meaning of the drama, you can determine whether or not that meaning is actually accurate or fair. For instance, having one confrontation with your new boyfriend or girlfriend does not mean that the entire relationship is doomed, even if your gut reaction is to believe as much. Look for emotional excesses. Negative emotional responses are normal and healthy when bad things happen, but when a negative emotion swells inside to a size that is difficult to manage, it might be an irrational response. 5. Briefly view things from the opposite perspective. Take a moment to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Try to figure out why that individual may have behaved as he or she did. Ask yourself if he or she might be dealing with an issue that caused the poor behavior. Try to understand that person's pain while acknowledging your own. Determine whether the incident was accidental or intentional. You may find it easier to move past this particular case if you realize that there was no ill will behind it. 6. Ask yourself how your reaction impacts you. Consider the sort of effect you're having on yourself. You will probably realize that your own reaction is hurting you more than it should. Consider what might happen if you react in the way your irrational responses tell you to do. Ask yourself if the consequences would benefit you as an individual or if they would benefit your relationship with the other involved person. If the answer is no, your gut reaction is probably an unhealthy one. 7. Identify other options. Make a mental list of the other responses you could have to this current incident. Go through this list and ask yourself what a better response might be. While the specifics will vary on a case-by-case basis, your two basic options will be to vent your hurt on the other person or to remain calm in spite of it. Consider your long-term options as well. You can set boundaries in the future to limit both yourself and your antagonist if you deem it necessary to do so. 8. Form realistic conclusions. Return to the irrational meanings and conclusions you identified previously. Alter these conclusions so that they become more realistic. Look at the conclusions you initially drew from the incident. Having already determined which aspects of your response were irrational, you should already know what an unreasonable expectation looks like. You can build a more reasonable expectation from your knowledge of what is unreasonable. For instance, you may have concluded that your relationship is doomed after one large argument. Once you identify that as an irrational conclusion, you can lead yourself to conclude that arguments will occur in any relationship and can often be resolved. Part 3 After 1. Acknowledge your victories. When you successfully keep your buttons from being pushed, congratulate yourself. The process takes a lot of discipline and is something to be proud of. On the other hand, you also need to forgive yourself for the failures. If you slip up and explode after having your buttons pushed, acknowledge the failure and forgive yourself for it. Only after forgiving yourself can you let the negative experience go. 2. Be thankful for the lesson. Instead of viewing each incident as a needless test of your patience and goodwill, tell yourself that each one is an opportunity for you to learn and grow into a better person. Reflect on each experience after it passes. Ask yourself if you've learned any lessons about the process and apply those lessons to future incidents. As time passes, you may find old wounds beginning to heal and ancient misconceptions being corrected. 3. Consider sharing your experiences. When someone pushes a button without meaning to do so, approach him or her after you've calmed down and explain what happened. By sharing the experience with the other person, you may help that individual learn his or her own lessons. Your relationship with that person may also become stronger. The key is to approach the discussion calmly and fairly. You are engaging in honest communication, and to do so, you must take responsibility or the experience without putting any blame on the other person. Avoid doing this when handling someone who intentionally presses your buttons, though, since these individuals are only interested in causing you grief and may even look for a way to use this experience against you.